Hello everyone and welcome to Destination Truth. If you're new to my channel, I am a libertarian and a minarchist, and I hope to give you the absolute most news and information about this terrible shooting as I can. It's based on objective reality and not lies from fake news. So far, on the bright side, I will say this. This is the first shooting I have seen in a little while that I have no doubt that there is actually no, third party involvement. This is the legitimate high school shooting, everyone. This is a very tragic event, 18 dead for sure. And there's, absolutely no signs of like foreknowledge or crisis actors. And I'm sure I'm going to get some down thumbs and some people stopping watching me right now just because I am going to bring up Sandy Hook, because I have to say that there is no evidence of, third party involvement and, shadow groups trying to use real events to sway public opinion, because in reality that has happened many times, and there is actual documentation from the federal government basically stating, this is Operation Northwoods, that they are willing to use real events, blow up real planes, drone planes, but nonetheless do real things to sway public opinion. So I'm very saddened by this event. But on the bright side, this is real. And I just want to say that because I know there's hundreds of thousands of you out there that are very skeptical of things like this nowadays because of the Sandy Hook shooting. Now, if you're about to give me a thumbs down, please don't just yet, and keep watching just for a second, because you need to just stay your hand when it comes to judgment just for an extra minute, because you need to understand that Sandy Hook, if you didn't do more than at least maybe 2 or 3 hours of research into it, you wouldn't have realized that there is actually a lot of evidence suggesting that there was use of there's basically a third party trying to orchestrate the event, as in it might have been a literal fake event, a false flag event. This, on the other hand, is not. This is legitimate, everyone. I just want you to know that off the bat. This is a tragic high school shooting. The shooter, named Nicholas Cruz, is age 19. He had been expelled from high school, did not have his GED. He had a history of being bullied. He was kind of a small fry. His mom died, unfortunately, just 1 year before, and he wasn't even living with relatives. He was living with one of his friends' families, and his friend was 1 year younger than him. His friend was still in high school. His friend was actually attending this high school, Stoneman Douglas High School in Florida. His friend and him did not exchange any text that day that suggested that there was any foreknowledge given to the family or to his friend. Whether his friend was a target or not is not known. Again, this is Parkland, Florida. Now, the saddest part of this shooting for me personally is that this hits home for me quite a bit, because I had very close family friends that lived down there in Parkland. They lived there for over a decade, almost a decade and a half. All of their kids, their children, my cousins, 4 of them, were raised into adulthood, basically living out there. So they are no longer children. But they all 4 of them went to this high school. So that is why this story really hits home for me. All of them have posted things on Facebook that are just really sad, and I can tell they have really genuine concerns. And I want you to know, even as a libertarian, I think a lot of you will assume that I am very hard-headed, in the sense that I only think one way. That is not the case. I am also a very independent, and I believe in individualism, not collectivism. So I will say that I believe I have a number of ideas that I think could really help the U.S. With gun control. The laws currently are really confusing, because basically each state has their own gun laws, And I still think it's funny that politicians being so out of touch and unintelligent on this particular subject, basically just being fed some cue cards or given something to read off of a teleprompter, but they don't actually know very much. And if they did know, they would know that there is no such thing as a gun show loophole. All gun shows do require you to have a background check. That typically means you have to bring it, though. So there is a loophole within that loophole, being that you could potentially have a fraudulent one. But more often than not, this loophole can't even be exploited by anyone out of state as well. For example, a lot of people think Nevada. I'm sorry, Nevada is the place to go. If you want to get a gun, go to Nevada gun shows and you can buy a gun. In fact, that is not true. In fact, you cannot buy a gun in Nevada at a gun show unless you are a resident. So that loophole did exist, I believe, but the loophole has been plugged, I would say. Nonetheless, in Florida, there is no minimum age for owning a gun, but for buying a gun there is. So 21 years of age is the minimum for handguns and 18 for rifles. This boy was, in fact, 19 years old. This Nicholas Cruz, 19 years old, and he was able to actually legally pass a background check and buy an AR-15 rifle, which he used in this shooting. I do not know currently about any other weapons that he used in the shooting. I know the AR-15 was. Another random detail that's unfortunate that this boy didn't have a lot of friends and he didn't have a car. He wasn't in a very good situation financially, and he did in fact use Uber. He used an Uber to get to the high school for this shooting. And I would assume that he would have had to have some very long duffel bags at the least, if not a gun case with him. So for an Uber driver to allow him to use the trunk and not get up and open the trunk physically is a little lazy, but I don't necessarily blame them. You can't just place blame on people willy-nilly like that. It's life's complicated, and you don't pass judgment that quickly. But nonetheless, Uber took him to this high school for a shooting, and the driver did not have any suspicion of him potentially shooting up the place, but he confirmed that was the kid he took to the high school. I have not been able to find a comment from the Uber driver commenting on him having duffel bags or anything like that with him. But during the shooting, the high school had a drill that very day and had a drill for school shootings just a month before. So the high schoolers were in fact very disoriented and surprised and out of touch basically when this shooting did happen, because they thought it was another drill. They thought they shouldn't have to leave their classrooms because they thought it was a mistake, because they've never done 2 drills on the same day. A lot of the students, when they were out of their classrooms with their teachers heading out of the school, the high school policemen did go. I've heard the high school policemen did go running down many of these halls and saying code red to the teachers. That tells them that this is not a drill. In fact, there is a live shooter. That's what code red meant for this high school. And this particular school district was in fact more prepared than most high schools for a shooting situation. And to see that 18 were still killed, this is tragic, but there's a lot of things that we could do a lot better for this to not be a thing. People on social media are calling for, metal detectors at high schools and, a complete Big Brother totalitarian dystopian future where, you can't go anywhere without a metal detector. Literally. That's where we're heading, by the way. I would definitely say that I'm also a futurist, by the way. I am forward thinking, and at the current moment, because of the power of the NRA, which I do support actually. I'm not a member, but I do support them. With their power in this country and the power of the Second Amendment, actually banning guns is virtually impossible in this country. And even if they did, there'd be a large number of people like myself who would not give up their guns. And if you came for them, we would be the ones that rally together and fight back to the death. And I have to say that because you need to understand, if you're not a libertarian and you're a brainwashed sheep, you do need to understand that people other than you understand our amendment rights. They understand the Bill of Rights, and they understand, unlike you, that the Second Amendment is the only amendment we have that actually matters. I'm sorry. It's the only right we have that actually matters. None of the other ones matter. Why do I say that? Why? It's because without your Second Amendment right, you don't have any rights. Without a Second Amendment right and the ability to rise up against your government and say no more, the government can take any of those other rights away like that. And they will give 0 Fs because there's nothing to stop them. There's nothing to stop them if you don't have a Second Amendment right. So, we're going to get into gun control and what my thoughts are on this. There's actually not a lot of minarchists in the world. If you're new to my channel, a minarchist is someone that believes in minimal government, not the same as an anarchist. And I'm kind of doing this backwards. I just, I'm making videos as often as I can. I actually have 3 YouTube channels. One is brand new. This one's actually my oldest, and the other one is unrelated, so I won't bring it up. But I'm a very busy guy, basically. But the video I want to talk about is the ideal government for basically everyone, in my opinion. And it's a minarchy. And a minarchist government is not necessarily the smallest government. An anarchy is no government. Minarchist is about as small as it can get. But I want to make a great video about even a minarchy actually can have a rather large government, in my opinion. I think it's too big even. But it's the best way that you can run a society. And currently, the United States, yes, we're a constitutional republic, and in reality, we are in kind of late-stage socialism already. We're running downhill pretty dang fast. Over 20 trillion in debt, printing money as fast as we can to pretend to pay off that debt, when in reality, we all know that we are just circling the drain in this country, and economic collapse is kind of imminent. But I don't want to just spread fear. There's a lot of hope at the same time with cryptocurrencies, and I have a whole nother channel that is brand new that I'm going to start working on as soon as I can. Nonetheless, let's stay on topic, everyone. The saddest thing about this that the police have been saying was that the whole see something, say something, the whole see something, say something way of protecting your own culture just didn't work this time. People saw plenty from this kid, and they did nothing. They said nothing. He even had a YouTube video, apparently, where he was literally basically talking about wanting to do a high school shoot-up. That is a rumor, I have to admit. I heard that this video exists from a police officer, and that video I've not been able to find on YouTube. If I find it on YouTube, I will post it in the comments below. But yeah, this kid was deeply disturbed. Again, suspended from high school. He did not get his GED yet, but he had recently re-enrolled in adult school so he could get his GED, as well as he worked at a Dollar Tree store, living with his parents, his friend's parents, because his mom had died the year before. He had a history of being bullied because he was kind of scrawny kid and deeply disturbed. A lot of his classmates said he made social media posts about guns regularly. He talked about guns even at school itself. So at one point, he was even banned from having a backpack at school. That is deeply disturbing. I think he should have been put on some kind of academic probation while a high school addresses how to deal with someone that is quite literally psychologically disturbed. We need to talk about this. Everyone that is pro-gun versus anyone, so everyone that's anti-gun is pretty much saying guns are to blame for this. We need to ban guns. This is, enough is enough. We've heard enough. Take the guns away from us. We clearly can't safely use them. People are shooting each other all the time. It seems almost every other month there's a shooting like this, if not every month. And, believe it or not, we're not even in the top 10 countries in the world that have gun-related crimes per 100,000 people. And yet, we are the most diverse, multicultural melting pot in the world. And this is just another example of why partially why multiculturalism hasn't really worked. It just, you know, the countries on the list that have the most homogenous populations and strict gun laws, but not necessarily gun bans, typically have the lowest gun-related crimes, like Switzerland. Very low gun-related crimes, even though they have the highest number of guns per capita population-wise. So the population owns the most guns worldwide for the most part because they're required to by law, because they all have done military time. They've served in their military, which is also required. And yet they have a very low gun-related crimes rate because their population is homogenous. On the other hand, other homogenous populations, such as some African countries, I can actually bring this up for you. Okay, so here it is. So we're just going to go to the highest. And so, yeah, South America, Africa, South America, United States in the top, almost in the top 10, it looks like. Looks like is that number 10? I think we're number 11. But nonetheless, like I was saying, countries with lots of drugs, and Colombia is up there, number 6, sorry. When guns are readily available, as well as having gangs or organized crime, that changes things. For example, Australia is now probably at the lowest part of this list for the most part because they got rid of all their guns. And that's because in the 70s and 80s, they had a spree of motorcycle gangs that were shooting towns up. They even had submachine guns at one point, I think. I did a lot of research on this when I was younger, and that's why I remember this stuff. But yeah, so they did a gun buyback and got rid of all the guns basically in Australia. They've also banned guns in countries like, there's a lot of countries with gun bans actually. I'm surprised countries like Ukraine are so low. They have a very homogenous population, and yet guns are rather readily available in Ukraine. So as you can see, multiculturalism is definitely partially to blame, but if you have strict gun laws and you really enforce them, like the UK, as much as you hear about their immigration problem and their immigrants from the Middle East being a huge problem, none of them have guns. So, their crime when it comes to gun crime is rather low. However, their crime related to violent crime that is not gun related is, kind of skyrocketing right now. Anyway, so I just wanted to show you this, that, there's more to it than just the gun crime part. It also, you have to take into account the population exactly, as well as how strong or how powerful the local gangs and cartels or mafia is, because those things really play a heavy hand. Because if there is organized crime that really controls the country, then they're going to be able to import guns illegally rather easily. So you have to have a very strong police force, basically. Okay, I have gone on pretty long, guys. These are most of the facts. It's very unfortunate. Again, almost no chance, I think, of some kind of third-party involvement orchestrating this event. This is totally real. No crisis actors, no pre-planning, no evidence of anything like this. The police have responded remarkably. I think they're very organized. They cleared the buildings. They were able to find the shooter. Honestly, from what I saw of police commentary and such, I was worried that this kid could abandon the gun and maybe, if he hadn't bought it legally and was willing to go to jail, wear gloves or something and make sure there's no fingerprints on it, and then just ditch it and then just blend in with the classroom and pretend he's part of the high school. And then when they tell them to evacuate, he just runs away and gets away and takes an Uber home or something. Because the kids, when they're evacuating, if you watch some of the aerial footage, maybe there will be some in this particular video we're watching now, there was a time where they were having classes of 40 kids just run out of the school, hands in the air, and just run. And they just ran and ran until they were across this large 4 or 6 lane street. from the school. So, um, lastly, this is what I want to get into, which is what are the alternatives? So everyone's talking about, we need gun regulation, take away the guns. People can't stop themselves from shooting each other up. And people that are pro guns are saying, that's not going to change anything. Guns are here to stay. And what this really is a mental health epidemic. And it's proving that our country has very little solutions for people with mental health. And I think things are way more complicated than either of these statements. So I want to go into some of the things that I think are at play here. For one, yes, gun regulation would help. Two, yes, having better or less expensive psychological help would help. But also, we're heading in the direction of a less and less social future. People do not interact the way they used to. And each generation are consecutively there's the video I was talking about, by the way. There's running away. They're getting less and less social. Instead, there's been talk of thousands of women reporting on their own daughters, and I use this example because I think in the past it was kind of accepted that girls were a little bit more social when it comes to slumber parties and chat and such, where mothers were concerned and calling into psychologists and people, mostly psychologists, and trying to get their opinion as to what's going on when they're having sleepovers and the kids aren't talking. They'll have something on the TV, but even with the TV on, they're hardly watching the TV. And they're all on their phones instead. And all of them are talking to their friends that aren't there, talking about how much fun they're having, even though they themselves aren't doing anything. This is just something I've noticed many times from different medias, realizing that there is, in fact, a very serious problem with society at large in these developed countries that have this kind of technology. Every generation consecutively becoming less and less social and are in fact becoming, I hate to use the word, but almost socially retarded. And I'm using that for the scientific meaning, being that their development socially has been slowed dramatically. And people that are not autistic are in fact becoming more and more socially inhibited and shy and unable to relate to others and becoming more and more depressed. And of course, the pharmaceutical industry is going to love this and eat this up and just prescribe more and more drugs for all of us to kill us faster. But that's for another video, isn't it? I'm going to try to avoid even talking about globalist agendas that are helping perpetuate things like this from happening, because that is just a whole ball of wax that I do not have time to get into tonight. But the solutions are always, in my opinion, going to require more attention on local and regional demands. Large cities that are super multicultural, they have a serious problem at hand that is very hard to basically address. There are cities out there that undeniably have police forces that do not police certain neighborhoods because they are not welcome there. That's a problem. Because whether the gangsters in that particular part of town like it or not, the actual innocent citizens are basically losing in that situation. They are no longer with a police force that will help them when they need help. So in fact, the mafia or the mob or the gang, whatever you want to call them, in those areas, let's use Chicago for example, they run that part of town. So when you're running large city areas, regulating the guns, honestly, in my opinion, is something that might be a better solution. So this is one of three solutions I have, and the first one I'm going to call the local. So the first of these three gun regulation styles, I'm going to call the localist paradigm, or the local strategy. Strategy one. So make all gun ownership laws extremely local. Base it basically on smaller areas than county, and you'd have to have a federal, for this to be even slightly possible, you'd have to have a new government agency, obviously. And they would have a federal gun ownership registration database. And if you move or anything like that, basically they would, in fact, be able to force you to sell your guns to them if you wanted to move into an area where guns are not welcome. So, when we're already in deep stage socialism in this particular point in time, so I'm not going to try to apologize or something for asking for larger government because it's kind of too late for that anyway. But if you want to reduce gun-related crime, you'd want there to be a local way of enforcing this, because on the federal level, it doesn't make any sense. If you take guns from the entire country, people in Alaska are literally going to start dying to bears and wolves. So doing that doesn't make sense because there's lots of bears and wolves up there still. So, if you haven't dealt with that, then you just don't know how that works yet. And so you don't pass judgment or even really go there, okay? But if you could do that, then you could have large cities with populations over 500,000 ban guns if that's what you really want. If that's what you want, people can choose where they live. If you want to have more freedom, move somewhere else. So as a minarchist or something close to being an anarchist, you can guess that makes sense. Everything that is more local, giving people the chance to stay within the same country because they like the country at large, but certain rights or certain freedoms they care a lot about, if you make it more local, you can really change things. So you could ban the guns in large cities. And then out in the country, you can make it very, open carry if you like, because maybe there's animals or you're a rancher or something, and there's, you need to keep your animals safe, for example. Also, there's going to always be people that just simply believe more guns, less crime is a thing. And to some extent, I do believe in that because it's been proven in some situations. But at the same time, you have to realize that banning guns altogether has, in fact, also worked. But in reality, I mean, that gives way to a lot more crime that I think is more vicious, stabbings, rape, etc. So it's kind of like you have to take into account the complexities of violent crime. Okay, so local strategy is my first one that is pretty much great in my opinion, but there's two other ones that I really think would be also great alternatives. The second one I'm just going to call the psychological test strategy. And in an ideal government that actually works for the people intelligently, I would call for a psychological evaluation that would basically evaluate you on many things. So the test would basically be able to get down to your true opinions by asking things in good ways. I am not a test maker per se, so all I do know is that there are ways to make questions basically get down to core beliefs. There are ways to do that, and if you had a very, very good comprehensive test to evaluate things like IQ as well as some certain beliefs, you could basically have a society where you had to take a psychological test in order to have a right to own guns and to vote. That also, I think, is a great idea because you could preliminarily ban criminals from voting. You could also preliminarily, as in before these people become criminals or psychopaths, root out people that basically should not be allowed to vote because they are more likely to vote against the best interests of the majority. So having a psychological test for voting and gun rights, as well as some other things such as holding certain offices in government or positions in police enforcement or something, those types of things are very important. And currently, there are no psychological tests being enforced by any government that I know of for any of these types of things. They're either all no guns, or they're for guns, or something of that nature. And there's very few psychological tests for getting the ability to run for office, for example. And there's definitely nothing for having the right just to vote. So there's a lot of things wrapped up in this particular psychological test. But at this particular point in time, with the number of shootings that we are seeing these days, honestly, just having a background check is clearly not been enough. So who is opposed? If you have some comments to post, please throw them down below. I'd love to see what you guys are thinking about this. But a psychological test to own guns would allow people like myself and some of my friends I have that own a lot of guns, the ability to still own guns. And me and my friends that I know that own a lot of guns, I know for a fact that they are very level-headed, and everywhere they go, even if they had a gun in their pants at that time, they don't make me nervous. They make me feel safe. And I'm not joking. Like, I have one friend who, I honestly don't know if he has the right or the permit for conceal and carry, but I know that he's done that at least once in his life, and the guy is so level-headed and peaceful, almost a pacifist. And so most people, you might be quick to judge, but you don't know the guy. So a psychological test might be a great way of rooting out those who should not have that right versus those who should, because they are basically undercover cops now. And in certain societies especially, I think a lot of people would like to live in a place like that where there's going to be very low crime, because anyone that wants to rob a bank or shoot up a school, they realize that a lot of the people there are armed and they're not going to walk away. If they start a violent crime, they are going to die. Those kinds of tactics lower crime drastically, and that's been proven as well. Okay, my third and final strategy that I think would be great for more sensical gun regulation compared to what we have, which currently is just, the states have at it and the state laws vary drastically. And, there's just not a lot of federal regulation other than, the feds do uphold our Second Amendment rights. So the states all have to squabble around how to deal with that. And I would argue very few of them do it right, if any. But I mean, Florida being super pro gun rights, we've had two major shootings, this one in Orlando, in just the last 2 years. So, being super pro gun, but without having a pro gun actual culture doesn't seem to work, because Florida is kind of like a West Coast, East Coast state, and yet they're pro-gun legally, and yet the people don't own guns. Whereas in Texas, a lot of people own guns, and they're pro-gun. So that works for them. They actually have a lot lower crime than most other states. They're not even the top 20 for highest gun crimes for the United States. So that's another piece of evidence to throw in the pile there. It's like Texas has a lot more guns than any other state, probably without a doubt, though I haven't looked that up for the record. Nonetheless, it works for them being pro-gun because the people there are pro-gun. They like open carry type laws. Anyways, so last strategy, last thing for the video. Thank you for bearing with me, and please give me a like and subscribe if you like this kind of content. This is still a relatively new channel, and I really need your support. Here we go. Last strategy. I call it the rural only strategy, and this one is kind of my least favorite because it doesn't take certain things into account, but it basically is simply rural counties only allow people to own certain kinds of guns. This one also potentially would allow the banning of all pistols. Personally, I do believe that pistols kind of aren't needed. They're not really used for hunting. They're hardly used for self-defense unless you're a policeman. They're really only used by criminals and really evil people. So, give them to the cops, yes, but I mean, maybe a pistol ban would stave off some gang and drug group crime. But anyways, the strategy name is actually called Rural Only, I call it. And it says folks in cities and towns with a population less than 20,000 or 50,000, depending on the state, can own guns. And it'd be pretty liberal, and obviously there would be tons of nuance as to what kind of guns. Do you want to ban shotguns? Do you want to ban assault rifles? Or do you want to allow everything under the moon other than flamethrowers, because flamethrowers were banned internationally? And rocket launchers should not be owned by civilians as well. I think that's a given. But there's in America in particular, there actually has been a lot of different weapons that have not been made illegal until someone actually did something. I think a flamethrower still to this day is technically not illegal by any federal laws in the United States or state laws, but it is internationally illegal, so we abide by that law. So it's just, obviously there's a ton of nuance when it comes to firearms, but making this a rural versus urban thing, I think would actually lower crime drastically, just because in urban centers, having a lot of law enforcement can be paid for. Like, you can afford a lot of law enforcement in urban centers. In rural areas, you really can't. You got like one or two, maybe as many as 5 policemen in the town. But you can't afford that many. So you got to deal with crime yourself. And so, yeah, this is definitely one that I think would also help in many parts of the country, in small towns all over the place where people have to defend themselves. Just keep in mind, everyone, the police do not stop crime. They solve crime. Crime happens. It is very, very rare when police show up and are able to stop crime from happening. Typically, crime is reported when it's already been done. So just always remember that. If you have an armed assailant enter your home, your best chances of survival are not hiding in a closet and calling 911, but either running away or grabbing a gun and fighting back. Those are your best chances of survival, honestly. Anyways, I just want to reiterate that my heart goes out to everyone that was affected by this shooting, and remind the country that, there is a ton of nuance at play, and just simply yelling, ban all guns, or this will not solve anything, it's a mental health crisis. There's more nuance to it than even that, and it's not so complicated that we can talk about the nuance. And I think it's about time that we start having level-headed intellectual discussions about this, because clearly doing a rash decision like banning all guns is not viable in this country, and I don't want it to. I will be one of the ones that fight tooth and nail to the death to fight the federal government if they tried to do that. All right, everyone, I thank you again for watching. I hope you learned something and you liked some of this content. If you did, please like and subscribe. This is Destination Truth. Always seek the truth, and this truth will set you free. That is all for tonight. Have a good night.